Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Henry Sheldon Museum's Zoom presentation through the laser lens by Will Amidon. I am Bill Brooks, the Executive Director of the Henry Sheldon Museum. This afternoon's presentation by Will is in connection with our current exhibit, Sightlines, Picturing the Battell and Breadloaf wilderness areas of Middlebury of Vermont's Green Mountains. This exhibit highlights the paintings of Jill Madden and the photographs of Caleb Kenner. Their art captures the wilderness areas and is a tribute to the legacy of Joseph Battell, who donated and made possible the Green Mountains to the public. Behind me is one of Jill's paintings that's available when you come to visit the exhibit. Combining art and history, the Sheldon Museum celebrates and explores the recreational and environmental importance of the Green Mountains. Will Amidon is a native Vermonter from Charlotte, where he was introduced to the many rocks found on the Charlotte beach, where I happened to learn how to swim. A graduate of Champlain Valley Union High School in 1967, Will went on to earn his undergraduate degree from Carleton College, his MS in geological science at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and his PhD from the California Institute of Technology. Will came to Middlebury College in August 2010 and is now an associate professor of geology at the college. He has, and this is a wordsmith problem, tectonic geomorphologist who specializes in developing techniques to date the age of rocks and sediment deposits. Will is an avid backcountry skier, and his love of the wilderness that we celebrate stems from his extensive winter explorations on skis. Will, his wife, and their daughter reside in Cornwall, Vermont. Before turning it over to Will, a few housekeeping details. The program is in the webinar format, meaning you, the audience, is muted and do not appear on the video. If you have questions for Will, please type them into the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen throughout the talk. And will have the opportunity to answer them at the end of the program. Together with the able assistance of my Sheldon Museum colleague, Taylor Brosini, Middlebury College class of 2020. Just so you know, the talk will be recorded. It is with great pleasure that I introduce you to Will Amidon.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. I'm hoping that you can see my screen. And if you can't, let me know or let Taylor know. Also, if you can see my face, I suggest you minimize that window because what I'm really going to show you is a series of pictures today, and they're going to take up most of your screen. So get rid of my mug and open up your screen to these beautiful photos. So I first want to say thanks for the introduction, Bill, and thank you so much to Caleb and Jill for inviting me. Jill asked me about the possibility of doing a talk, and I really couldn't think of anything that I would have to add to their lovely exhibit. And then about a week later, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to share this way of looking at the landscape that we use very commonly in geology and geography, and share that with perhaps the larger community, wilderness lovers or artists who are interested in different ways of capturing landscapes. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk today about a method called LIDAR, or light detection and ranging. It's a way that we can render images of the landscape basically using laser beams fired from an aircraft that measure the elevation of the land surface in really, really high resolution. And they let us create these bare earth images like the one you can see in front of you, where the trees have been stripped off and the texture and the shape of the landscape has been revealed in great detail. And so we're gonna look at a lot of these today and talk about how we make them. So here we go. I wanted to also just first acknowledge Jill and Caleb's amazing work. If you haven't had a chance to go down and check out the exhibit, you really should. They're both such talented people. I am proud to say I have one of Jill's paintings in my home. I do not yet have one of Caleb's photographs in my home, although I'm angling for one. But I will say I first came across Caleb's work during when he had a spread in the New York Times in 2020, and a friend had sent it to me, said, check this out. And I thought, okay, fine. You know, I don't usually check out the kind of art, the art section of the New York Times. Opened up these photographs and was blown away, just absolutely stunned at how this person, Caleb Kenna, was capturing this beautiful nuance of the Champlain Valley landscape. You know, things that I might see on a jog or at the end of a ski day and think, oh, isn't that beautiful? And it never gets shared, never gets captured other than maybe in the fog of my own mind. And so the fact that Caleb, you and Jill are able to capture these things and make them permanent is just amazing to me. So I'm really honored to be a part of this with you. And I'll just say that, you know, to me, the Green Mountain National Forest, the Battell Wilderness, the Breadloaf Wilderness, these are such special places. And they're really unknown worlds to be explored. They're worlds that were once known to loggers and probably to lots of people. They've been grown over now with reforested and kind of returned to this wilderness state. And very few people venture into the kind of depths of these wilderness areas. And as Bill said, I know most of this terrain from skiing in the winter. Trudging around, the beautiful thing about skiing is you can never get lost because you leave a track. And so that means that you can go anywhere. You're not constrained to the trails. And in fact, once it fills in with snow, the landscape becomes even easier to travel on. It's flatter and it's consistent. So it's a wonderful way to explore these areas. And I've been blessed to explore them with my family. Here's my daughter, Pippa, crammed into her ski buggy and catching a great snowstorm. We spend a lot of time on Steam Mill Road and on Brooks Road. And also to be explored with friends. Here's some of my backcountry ski partners who we have really ventured far and wide into different parts of the wilderness over the years. And often by myself. You know, this solitude of these wilderness areas, especially in the winter, is just incredible. Set out on your skis and really get lost and immersed in this amazing landscape. So those are some photos to motivate kind of my feelings and love for these wilderness areas. But I'm not a photographer, I'm a geologist, and the world I live in is a world, as Bill said, I'm a geomorphologist. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about why the landscape looks the way it does. How did it come to be? And a lot of times that means asking, you know, what is the shape? What is the texture? And this technique, LIDAR, has been a huge boon for people like me, because it just brings out all of this incredible detail. And we look for patterns, right? What you can see in this image in front of you, you probably have no idea what you're looking at. Maybe some of you do, but you can see the patterns. And one thing I love about this is you can see that the pattern on the left side here is quite different than the pattern on the right side. And what you're seeing here is the crest of the Green Mountains in the Breadloaf Wilderness. So this is the drainage divide along the spine of the Green Mountains. This Breadloaf Mountain is just to the north. Middlebury Gap is just to our south here. And this is the Steam Mill Road, right here, this little raised bump or line. And so what I love about this, right, this side is smooth and this side on the east is rough. And the reason, and this side is scarred, right? It has these big gashes and these lineaments cutting through it. And the reason here is quite simple. It's that the west side of the mountain range is mantled in thick glacial deposits, gravels and glacial tills that appear smooth once soil has developed on them. The east side, in contrast, was ground down to bare bedrock and appears rough because there's a lot less soil development, there's fewer glacial deposits. So there we're really seeing the broken, fractured bedrock itself, hundreds of millions of years old. And I just love that textural difference here. And scientifically, the reason for that is that the glaciers were flowing here essentially out of the northwest. And as they came upon the spine of the Green Mountains, there was melting on the upstream side that was causing a lot of outwash to be dropped, and then intense erosion on the downstream ice side. So this is just to really whet your appetite and what we can see in the LIDAR. Also, I forgot to mention, if you have questions, I won't be monitoring the chat, but feel free to put questions in the chat, and I think Taylor can get them to me. And I don't mind stopping during the talk at all to answer questions or go back to an image, because really the main thing we're trying to do here is just show you guys a bunch of super cool renderings of the landscape. So I'll go on a brief scientific detour here to tell you what is this thing LIDAR? It stands for light detection and ranging. And what happens is we mount a laser, not we, other people mount a laser inside of an airplane, and that laser is able to scan back and forth. So this airplane flies along, and meanwhile the laser is scanning back and forth, shooting literally millions or billions of laser shots. And the travel time from the airplane to the ground and back is a function of distance and height. And that can be measured very precisely. So we can turn that two-way travel time of the laser pulse into ground surface elevation, basically. And because we have billions or millions of points, we know the elevation of every point on the land surface very, very precisely. There's a whole range of applications of LIDAR. It turns out that the laser pulse doesn't come back just once. It actually comes back multiple times, often bouncing off the top of trees, off of branches, houses, bridges, and eventually off the ground. So we usually build these digital elevation models with the last laser return, the one that we think came off the ground. And these are shot during leaf off period as well. So these are usually collected in New England in November, December, periods of time when there's no leaves on the trees and there's also not much snow on the ground. So we deliberately collect these when we have the best chance of really capturing that texture of the bare earth. Here's the actual Piper Navajo that did the flying in Addison County. Here's the laser system on the bottom right that was mounted in that plane. And here is the flight path that plane flew. You can see it didn't do all of Addison County. This was back in 2012 or 2011, but it did a good chunk of it. And this work is sponsored by often various government agencies, the US Department of Agriculture, the state of Vermont. Of course, LIDAR data is helpful for many, many, many things, from urban planning all the way to soil mapping, you name it. It's used in a lot of different ways. Okay, so that's the basics of the LIDAR. So once we have this elevation data, right, we have an elevation value for every point on the land surface. We actually need to display that in a meaningful way that we can make sense of. And the way we do that is using what's called a shaded relief image. So this is what you're looking at here. And most of you have seen these in some form or another. Often you've seen them in an atlas, perhaps a nice atlas. will have these renderings, but they're very tricky. And it takes actually a little bit of practice to understand what you're seeing. So I thought it was good to kind of practice on this one. So what we do in a shaded relief image is the computer simulates solar illumination on this digital landscape. So in this case, we've simulated the sun coming from the northwest at 315 degrees azimuth. And what it does is places surfaces that are facing directly at the sun are assigned bright values. So take a look, if you can, at this mountain right here on the right-hand side. You see this the edge of this mountain is very bright white. That color is assigned, recognizing that that surface is facing right into the sun. And so it's highly illuminated. In contrast, if you come up here in this area in the center, this is like the edge of a plateau right here. So this is the edge of a plateau, and this dark area is a very steep cliff dropping away from that plateau. And it's dark because it's completely in the shadow based on where we've put the sun. So we're putting anything that's in the shadow from that angle is dark. Anything that's directly exposed is going to be light. And then everything in between is assigned some other shade of gray. So what do we see here then? We see things like this river valley. You can tell it's a river because it's meandering, and it's incised. It's a little bit deep. And so it looks black in this picture, right? Because it's sitting in its own channel, which creates shadows. We see this is a highway, like a 4-lane highway here. Roads are pretty easy to spot because they're flat. And so they end up with kind of a specific neutral shading. And it may be that the edge of the road, like a highway embankment, is facing into the sun. So that turns out bright. So I hope this helps you kind of orient yourself with what you'll be seeing in the coming slides. And the final thing I'll say is a couple things to appreciate about LIDAR. One is this is unbelievably high resolution. So in Addison County, we know the elevation approximately every 0.7 meters, okay? This is beyond anything you've ever seen in a topographic map, right? Not even close. Here's a 10-meter DEM, digital elevation model, derived from a topo map. And you just see that there's just no detail in it. It's just the approximate detail is there. So LIDAR is literally a revolution for Earth scientists in the detail that it exposes. And the other really important thing is that it lets us see through the trees. And in New England, this is unbelievable. I always describe this is like landing on the moon for the first time. We are, or like, discovering the new world, in 1492. This is, we're seeing this bare landscape in a way that really no one has ever been able to see it before. And it's incredibly dramatic. So with that introduction, here we go. So I'm sure you all know, this is a picture and you're familiar. This is Middlebury, of course. Here's Middlebury, the town of Middlebury in the bottom right. Notice all the trees and grass that are really blocking our view. Here is a LIDAR hillshade rendering of that exact scene. So here is, go back. Here's the trees. Here's the LIDAR hillshade. So colors in this are just elevation. White is high and green is low elevation in this picture. And then the shading comes from the shaded relief. I love this image so much. I made this right after the data came out in 2012. What do we see here, right? So here is Middlebury. Here's, I guess, Weybridge Street heading out to Weybridge. Did you ever realize as you drove out to Weybridge, you're driving through this glacially streamlined landscape? Look at these. I believe these are bedrock fins that have been carefully polished and streamlined as the ice ground down from the north to the south. Have you ever been to Bittersweet Falls here, where that little creek cuts its way up into a bunch of sediment that's deposited in between the glacial the bedrock valleys. More importantly, what I love about this is the view of Chipman Hill over here. So did you ever know that the eastern side of Chipman Hill failed in a landslide at some point? It's got a bite taken out of it. It's absolutely dramatic. So Chipman Hill here is probably some type of glacial drumlin. It's a lobe of sediment deposited underneath a glacier. If you walk around Chipman Hill, I've never seen any bedrock over there. And so that idea is borne out by the fact that that loose sediment at some point seems to have failed in a catastrophic landslide where the east side flowed away. And the funniest thing, when you go up there and you go up the road to the top of Chipman Hill, there's that lovely bench where you can sit and rest at the top of Chipman Hill. It actually looks out right over this landslide. So if you ever wonder, where am I getting this view at the top of Chipman Hill? It's actually looking out right over this landslide. So we could probably spend the whole half an hour on this talk, on this slide. And I'm glad to share these with people later by email or post the talk somewhere. But I think we'll keep moving a bit. There's so much detail to see. So as I mentioned, a lot of what shaped our landscape, one of the most important factors is what's called the Laurentide ice sheet. This was a huge glacier, essentially ice sheet, that flowed down from Canada and actually buried Vermont under several kilometers of ice at least. So imagine being buried under 3 to 5 kilometers of ice towering above all of our mountains, right? No mountains poking out. Had a very profound effect on the landscape. But actually, a lot of the landforms we have in the Champlain Valley and in the Breadloaf area actually come from the retreat of the ice. As that ice was pulling back to the north, it was spewing sediment all over the landscape. There's a lot of meltwater, a lot of loose sediment available. There's absolutely no vegetation at this time. And so a lot of the features we see are essentially sediment left by the glaciers. And the next thing I want to show you is what's called a kame terrace, K-A-M-E. And this is a feature that's formed as a stagnant ice lobe, shown here in the upper panel, creates basically a river between the ice lobe and the mountain front. And you get a lot of water and a lot of sediment flowing between the ice and the mountain front. And it's depositing all of this sediment and filling in. Then when the ice finally melts, we're left with this little terrace that's made basically of river gravel, glacial river gravel. And it turns out we have a world-class example of one of these right over in East Middlebury. And this is, so just to orient you here, this is Highway 125 coming through East Middlebury. This is Waybury Inn. It's located right here. And this road continues. Here's where the highway turns and crosses the Middlebury River and then goes up the steep hill up towards Ripton. And so this is the Middlebury River, this little channel right here going into the canyon. And this is another image that honestly, we need about a half an hour to unpack the whole thing. But I guess the first thing I'll just note is the kame terrace itself. So if you look at, here's that bedrock texture where we see the kind of gritty, high frequency texture of the exposed bedrock. We come out to the range front and we see these smoother textures. These are the kame gravels. And actually right here in the center of your picture, I don't know if you can make it out, you see a channel right here coming this way, and the channel splits just like that. And you can see some other channels right down here where you can see clear evidence for braided channels flowing to the south. So these are channels that were flowing between the ice and the mountain front that are now kame terraces. So with this LIDAR, it's almost like you're back in time. At that moment, the ice was still there with this river flowing along next to it. And one of the things I love to do, if you ever want to challenge yourself, this is Notch Road right here. And so North Branch Road takes these two tight hairpins like this. If you go to the second hairpin and park, you can walk out onto all of this and you'll never know it's there. You never would see it. You can't see it. You can, maybe, but you would never know without the LIDAR image in your hand that these channels are there. There's so many other things happening here. Here's another channel that comes down near Upper Plains Road, where the Middlebury River was once coming and it was hitting the ice as it came down, deflected to the south, and actually carved out a pretty big channel near Upper Plains, totally abandoned now, right? This is completely disconnected from the river now. And then last but not least, I just love this little terrace scrap up here. You can see this guy sits very high, maybe 150 meters above the Middlebury River, okay? And you can see it too has braided channels on its surface. So what this is some glacial outwash surface that had a river flowing across it at a time when this entire area was still filled up. The entire Middlebury Gorge was still filled to the brim with glacial sediment. And this is a last little scrap that's preserved after everything else has been stripped and cut down into. So again, we could spend half an hour on this image or more, but it's just incredible. And the other thing is that if you ever go to East Middlebury, there's just houses all over this. People are living all on these features and have absolutely no idea, including a lot of houses who are actually living on this floodplain right here of the Middlebury River. Okay, so we'll keep cruising here, and we are working our way back to the wilderness. So I appreciate your patience. The next thing I want to just mention quickly is Lake Vermont. This was a huge lake that filled the Champlain Valley. The northern part of the lake basin was plugged by ice. Okay, here's the ice front, and a huge lake was backed up. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with this story. Middlebury was underwater, and the shoreline was near Bristol and other areas. But what's remarkable is as rivers entered this ancient Lake Vermont, they formed deltas. So deltas are these features that form when a stream enters a lake or an ocean, and it can no longer carry its sediment. So it drops its sediment underwater. And as it keeps dropping sediment further and further out into the water, it builds actually a flat-topped structure called a delta that's made entirely of river sediment and gravel. And one of the most spectacular examples of a glacial Lake Vermont delta is in Bristol. And it's just revealed in its kind of stunning glory by the LIDAR. So here we are, we're looking right down on Bristol, Vermont. This is the New Haven River flowing out of the mountains here. Here it's taking the huge oxbow turn around the A. Johnson Lumber Company is right here. And literally this is downtown Bristol right here. And so the cool thing that a lot of people don't know about Bristol is it is built on a delta. So this whole flat area right here with the sharp edge, this whole thing is a flat-topped delta that was built out into Lake Vermont, really probably only over about 500 years or less, maybe just a few hundred years. And it's spectacular. One other clue that it is a delta is everywhere you go along the front are gravel quarries. There's a gravel quarry here as you go up the hill, and then there's huge gravel quarries near Mount Abe High School, and all around the whole thing. People are chipping away at the edge of the Bristol Delta, using it for gravel. And then the other thing we see here is just a beautiful braided floodplain of the New Haven River. If you ever are under the misconception that Highway 116 is safe from the New Haven River, this is Highway 116 here. If you're ever under the misconception that it's safe, it is not. It will just be a matter of time before the New Haven decides it wants to move back over across Highway 116. And I'll just say quickly, a main use of LIDAR in Vermont is to map out active floodplains and active river corridors for river corridor management. So again, got to keep moving, but a beauty of Bristol here. Skip that. So it turns out that Lake Vermont wasn't the only glacial lake in the area. There was a number of smaller glacial lakes in the higher mountain topography that are essentially created when retreating ice, as we show here in the Greenland ice sheet today, retreating ice melting back can create very complex geometries as it withdraws from the high mountain topography. And it can essentially create transient or temporary lakes, such as this one shown here, where this lake is being prevented from flowing out by the actual ice sheet itself. And here's another one here. So we see these temporary lakes that are pinned up against the mountains by the melting ice sheet. These are very complicated because as the ice melts over hundreds of years, the shape of the lakes changes as the relationship with the topography changes. And so we get these complicated sequences of glacial lakes. And it turns out that the Breadloaf Valley hosted something very similar to this. And no one's ever worked out the exact details, but there was a series, most likely, of substantial lakes that were filling the Breadloaf Valley at the end of the last glacial cycle. And prior to LIDAR, we knew this because there's glacial sediment and lake sediment exposed along the Middlebury River, but the LIDAR just reveals so many more details. And so here I'm going to take you to a place called Steam Mill Road. And I'm sure that many of you have skied here. This is the road. If you drive through the Reichert ski area, you turn off on the Forest Service Road just before Reichert, turn off left, basically go through Reichert, and then keep going up the hill. You're on Steam Mill Road. And it's a Forest Service road. It takes you up the hill and then it turns north and goes along the foot of the mountains. And it's just wonderful biking, wonderful cross-country skiing in the winter. Another reference point is this is the Skylight Pond Trail right here, heading up to the crest of the Green Mountains. So if you've ever hiked to Skylight Pond, you would park right about here and you would walk up here. And so, I love this picture so much. And I've skied this, dozens of times, and until seeing the LIDAR, never really thought about what I was skiing through. Why is it so flat? And it appears that this road is taking you along a series of shorelines. If you can see these kind of complicated north-south oriented lineaments that are curving in some places. They're incised by the river. I believe this is probably a sequence of shoreline beach berms deposited as this glacial lake shrank from right down to left. The other thing we can see here is this huge channel. If you know that wonderful clearing right near the Skylight Pond parking area, the beautiful clearing with the view up to Breadloaf, what you're sitting in there is actually some type of channel. It looks like ice would have been pinned would have been here, and a huge Peri-glacial river at some point would have been flowing right through here, carving out this big oversized channel and coming out this way. The other feature here that I'll point out, but I don't really understand, is this thing. This is right at the crest of the hill. As you crest the first hill on Steam Mill, and sometimes you'll stop there to catch your breath. And there's this weird triangular scrap. I'm not sure if it's a scrap of a delta that's since been cut down by rivers on either side, but next time you're there, maybe climb up it and explore it. So there's a little peak. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention these white trails are the outer trails of Reichert. So this one here on the bottom is Brown Gate. And then if you've ever gone up Wagon Wheel Road and ripped in, this is Wagon Wheel coming up here. And then continuing, Wagon Wheel continues right up. Actually, the upper part of Wagon Wheel goes right through these shorelines and then meets Steam Mill here. Okay, so I wanted to, I've just got a few more of these slides and then we'll wrap up with questions. But I noticed that Jill had done some beautiful paintings on the Norski Trail. And actually, I remembered seeing her one morning. I was going out to ski and she was coming back from, I guess, from painting along the Norski Trail. And I thought, wow, this is an adventurous painter. She's an adventure painter. So it got me thinking about the Norski Trail and what that looks like. And so here again, if you look at the air photo, what do you see? Nothing. You see a bunch of trees. We've got Highway 125 coming along the bottom here. Really, so here we're just across the street from the Snow Bowl, basically. This is just on the other side of the road from the Snow Bowl parking area as you approach Middlebury Gap. And here it is. So let's strip those trees off again. And here, I've actually got the Norski Trail line on here, this in red. It heads up and it eventually connects up to Steam Mill Road. And you know what to say about this other than isn't it also beautiful? I guess the thing that I'm most struck by that I had never knew about until yesterday was the Norski Trail. It kind of follows a contour around and it contours above these two surfaces, this surface here and this surface here, which I believe are delta surfaces. They are probably, they're almost certainly places where this watershed was entering into a glacial lake and creating deltas. And then we actually have a lower delta right here, another surface, which would be above you as you drive up to the Snow Bowl. So some interesting surfaces to explore up here. Also, I don't know if anyone's ever been into this particular area, but I have no idea what these pockmarks are. If they are, yeah, I really don't know. If there's little gravel pits or some other clue to the formation of this landform. But anyway, the Norski Trail, what's cool about it, it continues kind of along these topographic scraps or these benches, taking the high route over to meet Steam Mill Road. This over here is the Long Trail. So this is the Long Trail going along the crest of the Green Mountains. And this is an old gravel quarry down here. So the one other place I guess I wanted to show you was the eastern side of Middlebury Gap. So just made this image this morning. I had never taken down this LIDAR data, but to orient you a little bit, this is Middlebury Gap right here. So this is the parking area. This is Long Trail South heading off this way. And this is Long Trail North heading off this way. This is Lake Pleiad right here. And for those of you that know where Bailey's Falls, this is the Bailey's Falls chairlift on the backside of the Snow Bowl is here. And Bailey's Falls itself is actually sitting down right here below the highway. And I was motivated to include this for a few reasons. One, this is an area that's just very, very special to me. I love being out here in the winter. And also I noticed that Caleb had taken a nice photo of Lake Pleiad in the exhibit and also had a beautiful photo of the real Bailey's Falls. If you've never been to the real Bailey's Falls, I really recommend it. It's quite easy to walk to, and it's this beautiful hidden gem there. So what do we see in this image? Oh, it's kind of complicated. It's beautiful. We can obviously see the ski trails at the Snow Bowl kind of cutting across the topography over here. But if you've looked to the northeast off the chairlift from the Snow Bowl, you've seen these cliffs here, these super rugged cliffs. And what you can even see on a winter day when the leaves are off, you can see these huge mega boulders that are actually captured in the LIDAR here. you can actually see this texture is a boulder texture of these giant house-sized boulders that have fallen from the cliff. So there's one big field of them here. There's another huge field of them here. And so as I was saying earlier in the talk, this is really different than the west side of the mountain range. And if you're a backcountry skier, this matters to you a lot. If you go to ski on the west side, you're going to be having a totally chill day, cruising through some open glades on some very smooth terrain. If you come to ski this terrain back here, there better be a lot of snow because it's incredibly steep and incredibly rugged with all this rock fall. And the reason is as the ice was flowing from the northwest to the southeast, it was particularly erosive as it reached as it crossed onto the eastern side of the ridge. And you can actually see that here. You see these escarpments, these bedrock escarpments right here, and this cliff face here. Those are places where the ice was flowing over these rocks, almost like a waterfall effect, and was actually circulating and grinding and plucking huge boulders out of these cliff faces and spewing them all over the hill slopes. You can actually see this freshly plucked scarp here. And I guess the other thing I do appreciate about this photo is you can just get great views of all the abandoned logging roads. So if you've ever gone up into this area, which I have a bit, and this is true of any area, there's no hiking trails up through here, right? There's no drivable roads. You go through the forest and you stumble upon these networks of ancient logging roads. You can see one here. They're so well defined here for whatever reason. Maybe they're a little younger. And it reminds you that what is now this wilderness was once literally barren, stripped of all trees, and that there's hardly a part of this that wasn't touched by loggers. And it's just this fascinating forgotten piece of history as you discover these logging roads in the woods that are also clearly visible in the LIDAR. So it might be a neat project someday to try to map these out and put some of that history together. So as I wrap up here, I want to go back to, I guess, discovery. And every time I look at the LIDAR, I discover something different. Every time I go skiing to a new place, I discover something different. And that's what I love about these wilderness areas. And so what I discovered, among other things, yesterday was something I'd never seen. If you ever skied the Widow's Clearing Trail, so you park at the Brooks Road trailhead, you head south on the Widow's Clearing Trail, right where you meet the Water Tower Sundown Trail, right around here. Strange thing. This is right where you go down that steep hill and you go back up a little bit. If you were to keep going, you would come upon this crazy topography. What is this? I don't know. These lobate fans that are kind of radiating southward. It appears that there's quite a swamp or a wetland in here. And that wetland is kind of superimposed on these radiating lobes. This is a part of the forest I've never ventured into, and I don't know what they are. They may be more shorelines, I guess is most likely. There's a possibility they're actually sand dunes from the immediate post-glacial period when there was a lot of sand blowing around. But if you get there, let me know. And just for reference, this is the road out to Blueberry Hill here. So these actually aren't far from the road to Blueberry Hill. But that was something I discovered, and there's so many more things out there for all of us to discover. And I wanted to just close with a quote from Joseph Battell that I absolutely love. Some folks pay $10,000 for a painting and hang it on the wall where their friends can see it. Well, I buy a whole mountain for that much money, and it is hung up by nature where everybody can see it. And it is infinitely more handsome than any picture ever painted. Mr. Battell, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think we can all agree we're so grateful for the lands that you have left to us. So thanks, everybody. I'm glad to take questions or look at more imagery.
All right, well, thank you so much, Will. These views, I think, having been in the exhibit, Jill and Caleb's exhibit every day since it's gone up, you know, you kind of lose the sense of the land that the two of them are grappling with in order to make these images. So that was really wonderful. And we do have a couple questions. Here, I'll pop my video on too. We do have a couple questions. The first is about this laser technology itself. Does snow on the ground make it more difficult for lasers to recognize the distance from the plane and back?
I think the short answer is yes. The moisture in the snow attenuates the laser beam and basically diminishes the amplitude of the signal that comes back to the detector. So although it's not quite so clear as that, we do get like pretty consistent returns off of water, for example. So we do get returns off of water. And so we also get returns off snow. It just, you may not be getting the actual shape of the land surface, especially if the snow has filled in the topography.
Let's see, and a question about the odd topography of the pockmarks that you mentioned on the Norska Trail. Could they be kettle ponds? And for those of us who may not know, what is a kettle pond?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great idea. And it is possible. And actually, I think I may have an example here. So kettle ponds are formed when we get in the late stages of glaciation, as the ice is melting back, often you get a huge amount of debris covering the ice, rocks, soil, crushed rock, and you can actually get blocks of ice that are essentially embedded partially in the land underneath, and then partially in these sediment drapes within the glacial sediment. And then when those ice blocks melt, they actually kind of collapse and create these kettle ponds. This is actually a pretty good example of a modern kettle pond here. It's an interesting idea. It's totally possible. What made me think they might not be kettle ponds is that the surface is otherwise very, very smooth. And it looks to be paired with this surface. And whenever you see kind of paired, smooth surfaces, that's very often going to be some type of river-related deposit, either glacial outwash rivers or delta deposits. It just doesn't have that kind of high frequency roughness that you might expect from a bunch of kettles, but maybe it does. There are a lot of holes in here, so it's totally possible. And it'd be great to go out there and check it out. Although sometimes when you get out to these places, it's actually quite a bit less clear than it is in the LIDAR. But I think, it's a possibility. It's really not clear to me what's going on right in here. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
All right, and a question from someone who seems to be speaking your same topographical data language. What is your data QL and where did you get it? Did you make all the layers yourself from the point cloud?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. I'm actually not sure what you mean by QL, so feel free to follow up in the chat with that. I'm really glad you asked, because all of this data is freely and publicly available through the Vermont LIDAR program. And we actually now have LIDAR data covering the entire state of Vermont, believe it or not. So you can generate these images anywhere you like in Vermont and many other parts of the country as well. And the neat thing is you can go, just go to Google, search, Vermont LIDAR program. It will lead you into links to get the data. They offer the actual digital elevation models themselves, the elevation data, but they also offer the Hillshade product pre-made. So you can download that and just view it yourself. I'm trying to think of the other part of the question was, how did I make them? Yeah, so these I did make myself. Yeah, so I downloaded the digital elevation data. So this is from the last laser returns. So these models have discarded all the laser shots that they thought came from trees. They've removed structures like the ski lodge at the Snow Bowl has been actually removed by a computer algorithm. And so then I take that elevation data and I made the hillshade myself in QGIS. And the better ones I've showed you have a pixel size of 0.7 meter. So that's the size of each pixel.
And just a quick follow-up about QL. She's referring to quality level.
Oh, quality level. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's pretty high. Yeah, it's definitely not from the point cloud. Yeah, I'm not actually exactly sure, but it's the level that's been hydro-enforced and basically released for kind of amateur users like me, I guess. Yeah, and just to kind of unpack that a little bit, you can actually work with, where I mentioned I'm using the last laser return. Other folks, if you are studying trees, if you're studying forest canopy or something like that, you're a biologist, perhaps an ecologist, you would retain often all of the laser returns so that you can actually use that to model, the density of the forest canopy or the maturity of the trees, things like that. So I'm using a fairly, I guess you'd say, refined or high quality level of the data. Yeah.
All right, and on the same slide with the possible kettle pond now, someone is wondering what would cause the parallel bumps just above that area?
Yeah, so I'm guessing, okay, so here's our kettles right here in the center. So, it's obviously hard to say exactly what you're referring to, but these bumps, so these parallel bumps here are undoubtedly streamlined bedrock. So whenever you start to see, steep slopes that are not associated with a river, that's almost always going to be bedrock of some sort. And especially if you start to see high frequency steepness or high frequency roughness, that's often bedrock. So yeah, this is a bedrock lens. Here's a little bedrock right here. Here's a little bedrock right here. But then you see all of this where it's quite smooth and gentle. This is all sediment. And, there's a valley here that's been filled with quite a bit of sediment. Most of it is probably what we call glacial outwash. There could be some glacial till in there. There could be some actual river sediments from more recent rivers. But one of the things I love about this, is when a geologist sees this, what you see that all of this flat area, both to the north and to the south of this river, that was once a contiguous surface. When those glaciers pulled back, that's what was left, was probably a smooth, contiguous surface. And since then, this river, one of the upper branches of the Middlebury River, has cut right down into those unconsolidated sediments. So take all that evidence collectively as a geologist, and right away that's a bunch of glacial deposits there. It's not bedrock. I'm not sure if I answered the person's question, but feel free to follow up, or we could continue offline as well. Yeah.
And how does one find out what has been mapped? And specifically, are there any maps or mapping has been done of the western slope of Lake Champlain?
Yeah, in terms of LIDAR mapping, I'm going to assume the person's talking about LIDAR mapping as opposed to like geologic mapping. And so what's interesting about LIDAR, it is not a national effort. So, you know, like a topographic maps, you're often getting from the US Geological Survey. It's a nationally homogeneous set of topo maps. LIDAR, for whatever reason, has been implemented piecemeal across the United States, mostly by, often by state agencies or collaborations. And so for that reason, it's a little bit harder to find, actually. You have to kind of like search for it on the internet. Specifically, the western side of the Champlain Basin, I believe, is mostly covered by LIDAR now. And it's all held by New York State. I think the DEC or maybe the New York State Museum. But if you Google kind of New York State LIDAR, you'll follow the links. It's mostly covered.
Yeah. All right. And a response to the previous inquiry, let's see, the inquiries about quality level and the data cloud. The questioner is a botany tech with the Green Mountain National Forest and says
nice.
we do use all LIDAR iterations for various things like finding rare plant habitats. And there was actually a spot of a rare plant habitat in one of your slides.
Wonderful. Yeah, you should give a talk and I'll attend your talk. I would love to learn more about that. Absolutely. I think that is, it's astounding, the kind of microtextural information you can get from the LIDAR. You can identify depressions incredibly easily. It's very easily to identify, standing water, places you expect spring discharge to be occurring. So, and I guess, what I love about that is these are the same places you also will discover by skiing around or hiking around in these forests. But it's truly a revolution. So I guess that was Rachel. So yeah, maybe I'd love to learn more. Yeah.
All right, and I think this will be our last question. Why does Vermont LIDAR usually show existing buildings as flat spaces and not as cellar holes?
Yeah, so, again, when we're using this kind of, what's the word, higher level derivative of the LIDAR data, we're not using the raw data. We're using this data that's already been processed by a number of algorithms. I don't know exactly what the algorithm is to remove the structures, but somehow, probably based on the strength of the LIDAR return, the intensity of the signal, the really sharp edges of the structure, they're able to approximate, okay, that's a barn, and an algorithm automatically delineates the edge of the barn, and then everything within the edge of the barn is removed and replaced with some interpolated values from what's just outside the edge of the barn. And usually that's replaced with a single elevation value. So that's why a lot of the missing buildings just look like parking lots or something, like perfectly flat areas in the LIDAR.
All right, well, I think that will bring us to the end of our Q&A. Thank you so much, Will, and thank you to everyone for your very thoughtful questions. Just a reminder that the exhibit Sightlines that this talk is in conjunction with is on view through the end of this calendar year. And if this talk has gotten you excited about maps and topographical models, in addition to the exhibit, complement to Caleb's photographs and Jill's paintings is a set of 2 wooden topographical models carved by Tree Line Terrains, which is a group of Middlebury College recent grads. So you can come see the exhibit and you can look at some hands-on models that you are encouraged to touch and really feel the terrain of the Battell and Breadloaf wildernesses. So thank you again to Will. Thank you for everyone for coming. And the recording of this talk will go up on the Sheldon's YouTube channel by the end of this week if you'd like to revisit it. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.